Well, peace, friends. I'm Pastor Tom Arthur from Sycamore Creek, and I'm here with my good friend and fellow pastor. Who are you?
I'm Mark. Good to be with you, Tom.
Are we actually with each other?
We are virtually.
You're in your house, I'm in my house.
Yeah, you're in your bedroom, I'm in my bedroom.
Yeah. So we're in this series called I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening. And we did this politics survey. And I guess it measures people who are connected to our church who are willing to take a politics survey.
Yeah, basically. It's certainly not a scientific study.
Yeah. We did this really to start people thinking and get conversations going. It gives you and I a little insight into where people are at in our church.
Yeah.
And we really haven't had a place to share the results of this, so we wanted to have a conversation that we recorded that we'd post out there, that if you were one of those 60 people who took our survey and you were curious how it turned out, we're not going to share all of the results of it, but we're going to share some of the big pieces.
Mm-hmm.
You want to put any more scientific disclaimers around what we're about to talk about?
No, I mean, this is just for discussion. And it was, to get us talking and thinking about politics as we engaged a series on that, and it did.
Yeah. But Mark, you were, I think, really kind of nervous about this series, and I can't say I wasn't without my anxieties, but it's played out really positively in Potterville or in South Lansing. How's it been
Both
in Potterville?
places. It's played out really well in Potterville too. I think the stuff we've been able to do is really good. I think the big challenge of the series will be coming out of it. Do we have the actual grace-filled conversations? Does any behavior change actually occur? Or do we just admire the problem and say, yeah, we should have grace-filled conversations?
That's good. That's good. Well, let's look at the data from our survey. The first question was, how comfortable are you talking politics and talking politics and religion? And here's our fancy Survey Monkey generated graph. And you will see there that it's about even, Mark. People are about, they're kind of in the middle. Although it's interesting, it's like a goalpost, right? Because you got some somewhat comfortable and somewhat uncomfortable. So the standard deviation would be a little bigger.
Yes.
Than the average on this answer.
Mm-hmm. We're not doing any stats though on any of this, Tom. Not scientific.
No. Okay. It measures people who are willing to take a survey.
It does.
Who are at least loosely connected to Sycamore Creek.
And I think, like you said, what it shows is people aren't super uncomfortable or super comfortable. Most people kind of fall a little bit toward uncomfortable or comfortable.
Yeah, it's kind of we're a middle average church.
Yes.
In the middle when it comes to talking politics and religion. All right, so the next question that we asked people was, how often do you talk politics and engage in politics? And the answer to that was, again, kind of in the middle, but a little higher middle. It's not quite as goalposty.
Yes.
So people
the highest is the sometimes.
Yeah. Sometimes people engage with politics, and sometimes they talk to others about politics.
Yeah.
But there's a fair amount of somewhat often and often on those two answers too. So it is weighted a little bit towards that side.
Absolutely.
I think the averages are more accurate to the standard deviation would be a little less, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't a scientific study.
Yeah, I know. Stop saying standard deviation, Tom.
But really the interesting one in this was we asked people, how often do you talk to someone you disagree with about politics? And you can see the graph there. We left the number off, but here's the big reveal. Drum roll, please.
Whoa.
The average goes significantly down, shifts towards the rarely and sometimes categories.
Yes.
So,
Yeah, all of a sudden that blue bar gets much bigger where it's rarely.
what's really strikes me about this, Mark, is that people may be sometimes or somewhat often having political conversations, but they're really having political conversations with people they agree with.
Yes.
This
Yeah,
is why the echo chamber challenge is so important.
absolutely. Yeah, it's much easier to talk politics with people who agree with us. And I think even, if you look at some of the responses, like how often do you talk to others about politics? It's probably situational based on this. How often do you talk to someone who disagrees, where people talk more often with people who they agree with and less often with people who they disagree with. And that really comes out in that third question that we have there, and the average being below 3.
Now, I think that pastors have their own potential echo chambers, but Mark, I feel like I am constantly pushed as a pastor to engage with a really broad group of people, and I'm constantly having conversations with people that I disagree with on politics. Oftentimes other pastors.
That's true. That's our safe space. That's where we can disagree with someone about politics without having to worry about making a political statement one way or another.
Yeah. Do you find yourself in that same situation where you are regularly engaging as a pastor with people who disagree or you disagree with?
Oh yeah, all the time. I think the challenge is politics isn't even if you are a Republican or a Democrat, there are very different Democrats within the Democratic Party. There are very different Republicans within the Republican Party, and so it's very easy to meet someone that I disagree with. And that I think is the fun of individuals, and that really doesn't come out in this survey. But just because you identify with one party or another doesn't mean you agree with everything that they have as policies. And there's a whole range of things that you can disagree about, even under a particular political umbrella.
Yeah. We have that two-party system where it's those are broad coalitions for governing. Yes. I heard somebody say one time that Italy has 52 political parties.
Oh my goodness. That would be fun.
You have 52 options instead of just 2. There's more, of course, political parties in the United States, but there's 2 major ones. Yeah. I think the saddest thing was the answer to this last question, which is how optimistic are you? We are not a very hope-filled country right now. And so let's put the answer to that. How optimistic are you about having grace-filled political conversations? And the somewhat pessimistic,
the big winner there,
category. But how optimistic are you about the future political landscape of America? Gee whiz, we are a pessimistic bunch of people. Mm-hmm. We're firmly on the pessimism side. That's the lowest number of all of the results of our survey.
Yes. It's interesting, how optimistic are you about having grace-filled political conversations? I'm curious if people answered that just for our country in general, or maybe a good question would have been, how optimistic are you about having grace-filled political conversations as a church, coming out of this series? And I really hope that we won't be that low as a church. Maybe we don't have big expectations for grace-filled political conversations for our communities or for our state or our nation, but I would hope that it would be higher if we asked a specific question about our church. What do you think about that, Tom?
Yeah, this is of course one of the problems of doing surveys is once you look at the results, then you want to know, you want to understand the nuances of them better, and you always think, why didn't we ask this question? That would have been a great question to ask. About how optimistic you are about having grace-filled political conversations with other Sycamore Creek partners.
Yeah,
I'd like to think that the numbers would be higher, I know there's a lot of that. There was sort of some anxiety in our church about this series as a whole. There's still a little bit of anxiety. I mean, and if not a lot, it feels like right now we're in this political moment where a big wave comes crashing over us, and then you swim back up to the top and you get a breath of air and you feel you're like starting to just get your feet, and then the next big wave crashes over us, and it's just wave after wave, and there's every week or two there's some new like thing that's crashing down on us. And I guess if there's a silver lining, there's a lot of opportunities to practice having grace-filled political conversations right now.
Yes.
But when I see this slide, I was sitting with someone last night having a conversation who is not a Christian. They came over to my house and sat in my front yard, and we had a socially distant time together outside. And we were just reflecting on this is a pretty historic moment. And this person said to me, when your grandkids ask you, what were you doing during this time? What are you going to say to them as a Christian? And I said, well, one thing I'm going to say is that we did a whole series on having grace-filled political conversations. And they were really excited about that. They thought that was a good answer. And I feel like it is too. It gives us perhaps a little more optimism. It'd be interesting to take the survey before the series and after the series. That's a great experiment, right?
Yes.
You'd have to have the same people take it.
We would have to have the same people take it before and after. Clearly, we did not design this as a scientific study.
And then you'd have to have them have agreed to actually be part of all 3 weeks and the whole thing and the echo chamber challenge and the 8 at 8 challenge to get the full impact of what we've crafted here. But
yeah,
Mark, I feel like personally myself, this series has given me a little more courage and some handholds for having those conversations myself, particularly online with people, and has given me some really practical ways of thinking about engaging people. And probably the most significant is asking questions. Online is such a you throw declarations at each other. Yes. You comment at each other, but nobody stops to say, what do you mean by that when you use that word? Flesh that out for me a bit more. And I had this conversation with one guy online that went really long online, but I thought later it hit me that if we were in person and we each just read out loud what we wrote, it's only about 5 minutes of speaking out loud. So in 5 minutes of first meetings, this person I had never even met before, but in 5 minutes of meeting someone, I don't start throwing declarations at them. I'm asking, who are you? Tell me about yourself.
Yes.
And what's your background? How did you grow up? What's important to you? What do you value? When you use that word, what do you mean? And I don't know that I'm moving the scale at all of optimism in our culture with that strategy, but it's given me some more courage and handholds to engage those conversations. How about you, Mark, personally, as you've coming out of this series?
You stole my answer with asking questions, so I'll focus in a different area. But I think part of asking questions and what you just said, it gives you a different goal. The goal is a relationship and understanding one another. It's not changing the other person's mind. And that really struck me, is that all too often we think of political conversations as winning. And we think we've had a good conversation if we convince the other person that we're right. And that's a really poor goal. I much prefer the goal where you understand each other and you've strengthened the relationship. I love it if you could have a graceful political conversation and you walk away, maybe not agreeing, maybe not changing the other person's mind, but your relationship is better because of the conversation you had. And I love that idea, and it it gives me a view of politics and political discussions that I can really grab onto.
Well, I'm glad we did this series. We've got one more this weekend coming up.
Yes.
And if you are just seeing this for the first time and you want to take the politics survey, you can do so at bit.ly/politics survey. And we'll probably put that link and the links to the other messages and sermons and we're calling them episodes now, South Lansing.
Nice.
There's 3 episodes of the I Think You're Wrong, But I'm Listening series. We'll try to put the links in the descriptions with this video. So
that's good.
All right. We'll have a grace-filled political conversation with you soon.
Sounds good.